There is an aircraft so secret that for years, the United States government officially denied it existed. It flies at 50,000 feet, above commercial planes, above most radar systems, above nearly every missile defense network on Earth. It can take off from Missouri, fly halfway around the world, drop 16 nuclear bombs without anyone ever knowing it was there, and land back home in time for breakfast. No fighter escort, no radar ping, no warning, just silence, and then destruction. Only 21 were ever built. Each one costs over $2.1 billion per aircraft. That is more than the GDP of some countries, more than an aircraft carrier, more than anything that has ever flown in human history. So here's the question nobody actually asks. If the B-2 Spirit is so astronomically expensive, so outrageously over budget, and so controversial that even the US Congress tried to cancel it, why does every major military power on Earth desperately want one? China has been trying to copy it for 20 years. Russia called it their greatest strategic threat. And the United States guards its technology so fiercely that when one crashed in Guam, engineers flew in immediately, not to recover the pilot, but to destroy the wreckage before anyone could study it. Because the B-2 doesn't just drop bombs. It breaks the rules of what air power is supposed to be. It makes the impossible, invisible destruction from halfway around the world completely routine. This is the story of the most expensive, most secretive, and most terrifying aircraft ever built, and why every country on Earth either wants one or is desperately afraid of one. The problem that created the B-2. To understand why the B-2 exists, you need to go back to a moment in history when the United States military realized something absolutely terrifying. Their entire Air Force, every bomber, every pilot, every nuclear weapon strapped inside every plane, was essentially useless. It's the late 1970s. The Cold War is at its peak tension. America and the Soviet Union are locked in the most expensive, most dangerous standoff in human history. Both sides have enough nuclear weapons to end civilization several times over. And the entire American strategy for winning or surviving a nuclear war depended on one thing: getting their bombers through Soviet airspace. That's it. That was the plan. B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons would fly into Soviet territory, drop their payload, and shift the balance of the war. Simple in theory, catastrophic in practice. Because what American intelligence was discovering in the late 1970s was that the Soviet Union had built something extraordinary. A radar network so vast, so layered, and so sophisticated that it essentially formed an invisible wall, stretching thousands of miles across the entire Soviet border. The Soviets called their system PVO Strony, Air Defense of the Motherland. They had spent decades and billions building it, and by the late 1970s, it was working exactly as designed. We're not talking about a few radar stations. We're talking about an integrated air defense system, thousands of radar installations, surface-to-air missile batteries, and interceptor aircraft, all linked together into one massive detection grid. If anything with wings entered Soviet airspace, they would know, and within minutes, they would respond. From Moscow's perspective, they weren't building an offensive weapon. They were building a shield that just happened to make America's entire bomber fleet obsolete overnight. American war planners ran the simulations. Then they ran them again, hoping they had miscalculated. They hadn't. In a realistic attack scenario, Soviet air defenses would destroy the majority of American bombers before they reached their targets. Some estimates suggested losses exceeding 80% of the bomber fleet before the first nuclear weapon could be dropped. The B-52, that enormous, iconic aircraft that had defined American air power for decades, suddenly looked like a flying target. Radar saw it coming from hundreds of miles away. In a war, it would be dead before it ever reached Soviet soil. America had spent billions building the most powerful bomber fleet in history, and it was becoming obsolete in real time. This was the problem, and it wasn't theoretical. It was existential. The immediate response was the SR-71 Blackbird. Fly so fast and so high that radar doesn't matter because you're gone before anyone can react. Speed as a defense. Then came the F-117 Nighthawk, a different approach entirely. Don't outrun radar. Disappear from it. The F-117 was the first operational stealth aircraft, and when it flew, radar systems saw something roughly the size of a golf ball instead of a fighter jet, which meant that by the time operators realized what they were looking at, the bombs had already fallen. The concept worked, but the F-117 had a fundamental limitation that nobody liked to talk about publicly. It couldn't carry enough to win a war. The F-117 was a precision striker, 1 or 2 bombs per mission, surgical, precise, brilliant for taking out a command center or a bridge. But to actually destroy an enemy's military capability at scale, to hit dozens of high-value targets simultaneously across an entire country, you needed a heavy bomber. You needed something that could carry tens of thousands of pounds of weapons deep into enemy territory. You needed a B-52. Except the B-52 was visible from space on radar. So the question that landed on the desks of American defense planners in the late 1970s was almost absurd in its ambition. Can we build a stealth heavy bomber? Not a small, nimble stealth jet, a full-size, intercontinental, nuclear-capable heavy bomber that radar cannot see. When the requirement first landed on their desks, some engineers reportedly laughed, not out of disrespect, out of impossibility. You're asking us to make something the size of a commercial airliner invisible to detection systems specifically designed to find exactly that kind of aircraft. The physics of radar said it couldn't be done. The scale of the aircraft made it absurd. Everything about it seemed wrong, but the threat was real. The Soviet radar law was real. America's vulnerability was real. And the orders came from the highest levels of the Pentagon, figure it out. So in 1979, under a classified program so secret that even most of Congress didn't know it existed, the project that would eventually become the B-2 Spirit was born. The engineers called it the Advanced Technology Bomber. The world would come to know it as the B-2 Spirit. And what they built over the next decade would rewrite the rules of air power forever. The engineering miracle. Here is something that will break your brain a little. The B-2 Spirit should not be able to fly. Not in the sense that it's dangerous or experimental. In the most literal, physics-based sense of the word, a flying wing with no tail, no vertical stabilizers, and no conventional control surfaces is inherently, fundamentally unstable in the air. If you remove the computers from a B-2 mid-flight, the aircraft would begin tumbling out of the sky within milliseconds. Not seconds, milliseconds. The human pilot sitting in that cockpit could not physically react fast enough to save it. No human brain processes information that quickly. The only reason the B-2 stays airborne is because its flight control computers are making thousands of micro-corrections every single second, constantly fighting the aircraft's natural desire to become a very expensive pile of wreckage. So before Northrop engineers could even think about stealth, they had to solve a problem that had never been solved before. How do you write software that keeps an inherently unstable aircraft alive in the air, reliably, in all weather conditions, for missions lasting over 30 hours? It took them years, and that software, that invisible, classified code, is arguably more valuable than the physical aircraft itself. But let's talk about what makes the B-2 invisible, because the engineering here is almost insultingly clever. Radar works on a simple principle. You send out a radio wave, it hits an object, it bounces back, you measure what comes back, and you know something is there. The larger the object, the stronger the return signal. A B-52 gives you a massive radar cross-section, a huge, unmistakable signal screaming its location to every radar system within range. B-2's designers attack this problem from every possible angle simultaneously. First, the shape. That distinctive flying wing silhouette isn't an aesthetic choice. Every single surface angle on the B-2 is mathematically calculated to deflect radar waves away from the source rather than bouncing them back. There are no sharp 90-degree angles anywhere on the aircraft. No vertical tail fins that act as perfect radar reflectors. The entire outer surface is a series of carefully engineered curves and angles, designed to scatter radar energy in every direction except back toward the receiver. The result is a radar cross-section roughly equivalent to a large bird. An aircraft with a 172-foot wingspan, wider than a Boeing 737, appears on radar as something you might dismiss as a flock of geese. Second, the skin. The B-2 is coated in radar-absorbing materials that are so specialized, so temperamental, and so expensive to apply and maintain that they essentially define the aircraft's entire logistical life. These materials don't just deflect radar waves, they absorb them, converting the radar energy into tiny amounts of heat that dissipate harmlessly. The coating is applied in precise thicknesses, measured in fractions of a millimeter. Too thin, and the stealth properties degrade. Too thick, and the aerodynamics change. And here is the detail that genuinely stunned military engineers when they first calculated it. If rain strikes the B-2's skin while the engines are still hot after a mission, the thermal shock can cause the stealth coating to delaminate, to literally peel away from the airframe, which is why every B-2 on Earth lives inside a specialized climate-controlled hangar that costs over $1 billion to build and operate. The most powerful bomber ever built cannot get rained on. Third, the heat. Jet engines produce enormous infrared signatures that heat-seeking missiles lock onto. The B-2's 4 engines are buried deep inside the wing, completely hidden from below. The exhaust is routed through a complex mixing system that blends the hot exhaust gases with cooler air before they exit through slots cut into the upper surface of the wing. By the time those gases leave the aircraft, the temperature signature is reduced to a fraction of what a conventional bomber produces. From below, the angle that ground-based radar and missiles approach from, the B-2 is almost thermally invisible. And then there's the electromagnetic management. Every system on the aircraft that emits any kind of signal, radios, radar, electronics, is carefully controlled. The B-2 can fly in complete electronic silence, emitting nothing that detection systems can grab onto. The cumulative effect of all these systems working together is something that sounds like science fiction. A 171,000-pound aircraft, carrying enough weapons to destroy a city, flying at 50,000 feet, completely invisible to the most sophisticated detection systems ever built. The Soviets built their radar wall to stop exactly this kind of threat, and America built an aircraft that walked straight through it like it wasn't there. The $2 billion price tag. What are you actually paying for? $2 billion. Let that number sit for a moment. Not $2 billion for an aircraft carrier. Not $2 billion for a nuclear submarine. $2 billion for a single aircraft. One plane. One crew of 2 pilots. One machine that fits inside a single hangar. For context, $2 billion is enough to buy every NFL team in the bottom half of the league. It's enough to fund NASA's entire Mars exploration program for a year. It is, by every reasonable measure, an almost obscene amount of money to spend on something that flies. But let's put that number in perspective another way. The B-2 weighs 171,000 pounds empty. At $2.1 billion per aircraft, you're paying roughly $12,280 per pound. Gold, at current market prices, trades for about $2,000 per ounce, or $32,000 per pound. The B-2 costs nearly 40% the price of gold by weight. Except gold doesn't require 119 hours of maintenance for every hour it sits in a vault. So the question every taxpayer, every senator, and every military analyst has asked since the B-2 program became public is completely legitimate. Kimran, what exactly are you paying for? And the answer, when you actually break it down, is one of the most fascinating financial stories in the history of military technology. Because the $2 billion price tag isn't really about the metal. The metal is almost the cheapest part. Let's start with the manufacturing. When Northrop Grumman won the contract to build the B-2, they faced a problem that no aerospace company had ever faced before. The tolerances required to maintain the B-2's stealth properties were so precise, so unforgiving, that the tools needed to build it simply did not exist. Standard aerospace manufacturing equipment wasn't accurate enough. So Northrop had to invent entirely new manufacturing processes, entirely new tools, entirely new quality control systems, essentially building a parallel manufacturing industry just to produce this one aircraft. Here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. When production ended in 2000, Northrop Grumman didn't just shut down the assembly line. They dismantled the tooling. The massive jigs that held the wing sections in place during assembly, each one custom built to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, were scrapped. The automated drilling rigs that positioned every fastener with absolute precision were disassembled. The curing ovens that set the composite materials under exact temperatures were repurposed or destroyed. Military analysts call this industrial base erosion. In plain English, it means America forgot how to build the thing it spent $44 billion developing. If a B-2 were destroyed in combat tomorrow, the United States could not build a replacement, not without spending billions more to reinvent the manufacturing process from scratch. Which means that if America wanted to build more B-2s today, it didn't just restart the production line. They would have to reinvent the manufacturing process almost from scratch, at a cost that analysts estimate would push the per-unit price well beyond $3 billion in today's money. You didn't just buy an aircraft. You bought something that can never be fully replaced. But the purchase price is almost misleading, because the real cost of the B-2 isn't in building it, it's in keeping it alive. For every single hour the B-2 spends in the air, it requires 119 hours of maintenance on the ground. Read that again, 119 hours. A mission that lasts 30 hours, and the B-2 has flown missions that long, generates over 3,500 hours of maintenance work before that aircraft is ready to fly again. Compare that to an F-16 fighter jet, which requires roughly 10 maintenance hours per flight hour. The B-2 demands 12 times that. And the reason comes back to what we discussed in the last section, that extraordinarily sensitive stealth coating that covers every inch of the aircraft's surface. That coating is not passive. It doesn't just sit there indefinitely. It degrades. It gets damaged by temperature changes, by moisture, by the physical stress of air passing over it at altitude. After every mission, teams of specialized technicians inspect every square foot of the aircraft's surface under controlled lighting conditions, checking for any area where the coating has chipped, cracked, thinned, or separated from the airframe. Any damage, no matter how small, gets repaired before the aircraft flies again. Because a 1-inch gap in the stealth coating creates a radar reflection point, and a radar reflection point can get a crew of 2 killed over hostile territory. These aren't mechanics with wrenches. These are specialists with years of training in materials science, radar-absorbing technology, and aerospace engineering. The average B-2 maintenance technician trains for over 2 years before touching a live aircraft. The Air Force doesn't advertise these jobs. They recruit directly from top engineering programs and require security clearances that take months to obtain. Their hourly rates reflect that. Their scarcity reflects that. There are not thousands of people in the world qualified to maintain a B-2. There are a few hundred, and the United States Air Force employs most of them. Then there's the hangar. The B-2 cannot be parked outside. Not overnight, not briefly, not ever in operational condition. The aircraft requires what the Air Force calls the B-2 Composite Repair Facility, a climate-controlled, temperature-regulated, humidity-monitored shelter specifically engineered to keep the stealth coating stable between missions. Building one of these facilities costs over $1 billion. Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, where all 20 operational B-2s are based, has an entire infrastructure built around keeping these aircraft in condition. Whiteman AFB covers nearly 4,000 acres. The B-2 facilities, hangars, maintenance depots, crew quarters, security perimeters occupy a significant portion of that footprint. The base exists, in many ways, to serve 20 aircraft. The base itself is essentially a $3 billion support system for 20 planes. And here's a detail that reframes the entire cost conversation. A Ferrari sits in your garage and costs you nothing when you're not driving it. A B-2 costs you millions of dollars every single month, whether it flies or not, in hangar climate control, in 24/7 security patrols, in maintenance staff salaries, in coating inspections that happen on a schedule regardless of flight hours, in specialized equipment that depreciates whether it's used or not. A Ferrari is a luxury. A B-2 is a dependency. You are not buying a machine. You are buying a living organism that requires constant, expert, expensive care to stay functional. Over the operational lifetime of the program, the United States has spent more maintaining its fleet of B-2s than it originally spent building them. Since the first B-2 entered service in 1997, the United States has spent over $40 billion on the program, including development, procurement, and maintenance. That's roughly $2 billion per aircraft, twice. $2 billion to buy it, and then a lifetime of payments to keep it breathing. When you look at it that way, the price tag isn't shocking because it's expensive. It's shocking because it's actually worth it. But worth it for what? For the first decade of its existence, the B-2 was a secret, a rumor, a ghost that military analysts debated existed at all. Then came Kosovo, then Iraq, then Afghanistan. And the world finally saw what $2 billion of invisible destruction could do to an enemy that never saw it coming. The B-2 in combat. What it actually did. On the night of March 24, 1999, two B-2 Spirit bombers took off from White Man Air Force Base in Missouri. They flew across the Atlantic Ocean. They crossed into European airspace. And somewhere over the Balkans, in complete darkness, in complete silence, completely invisible, to every radar system tracking the skies that night, they opened their bomb bay doors. Nobody on the ground heard them coming. Nobody saw them on radar. Nobody had any warning whatsoever. And then, suddenly, targets that had existed for years simply stopped existing. Welcome to Kosovo. The moment the world stopped theorizing about the B-2 and started fearing it. NATO had launched Operation Allied Force against Yugoslavia, an air campaign designed to stop ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. And the Yugoslav air defense system was, by every military assessment, one of the most capable in Europe. Battle-hardened, Soviet-trained, sophisticated enough that just 2 weeks into the campaign, they accomplished something that stunned the entire military world. They shot down an F-117 Northhawk. The F-117, America's first stealth aircraft, the plane that was supposed to be invisible, was tracked, locked onto, and destroyed by a Yugoslav SA-3 missile battery commanded by Colonel Zoltan Dani, a man who had studied American stealth technology obsessively and figured out a creative way to detect it using older, lower-frequency radar systems. The world took notice. If Yugoslavia could shoot down a stealth aircraft, suddenly the entire premise of stealth technology was in question. Then the B-2s arrived, and everything changed. The same air defense networks that had killed the F-117 searched desperately for the B-2s they knew had to be up there. The explosions were happening, the targets were being destroyed, but their radar screens showed nothing. No aircraft, no signal, no trace. Colonel Dani's low-frequency radar trick that had worked against the F-117, it didn't work against the B-2. The geometry was different. The coding was more advanced. The flying wing shape scattered even low-frequency radar in ways the F-117's angular surfaces couldn't. Yugoslav operators were essentially firing blind into empty sky, launching surface-to-air missiles at coordinates they were guessing at. They never hit one. Almost. Here is the detail that was quietly classified for years and has only recently been discussed publicly. During the Kosovo campaign, at least one B-2 returned to base with damage consistent with a surface-to-air missile detonating in close proximity to the aircraft. Not a direct hit, a proximity detonation. Shrapnel damage. Real, physical evidence that Yugoslavia's air defenses had gotten closer than anyone publicly admitted. And the aircraft flew home anyway. Think about what that means. The plane that cost $2 billion, the plane with the sensitive stealth coding, the plane that can't get rained on, absorbed combat damage over hostile territory and flew back across the Atlantic Ocean to Missouri. The plane that shouldn't survive, survived. Over the course of Allied force, B-2Cs flew a total of 45 missions from White Men. Each mission averaged over 30 hours of continuous flight. Each aircraft was refueled multiple times over the Atlantic by tanker aircraft. Those long, silent rendezvous points in the darkness where a boom operator in a tanker carefully connected with an aircraft he could barely see. The B-2 crews flew so long that they ate hot meals in the cockpit, took turns napping in a small rest area behind the seats, and landed back in Missouri, having been airborne longer than most commercial pilots fly in a week. In total, B-2s destroyed approximately 33% of all Serbian targets hit during the entire operation, using just 45 missions out of thousands flown by NATO aircraft combined. 33% of the destruction from one aircraft type, flying from a single base in Missouri. Then came Iraq in 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom opened with B-2s conducting what military planners called decapitation strikes, precision attacks on targets where Iraqi leadership was believed to be located. The psychological dimension of these strikes went beyond the physical damage. Iraqi air defense commanders knew the B-2 existed. They knew it was coming, and they had absolutely no way to stop it or even detect it. Imagine commanding an air defense battery and knowing that somewhere above you, right now, there may be an aircraft carrying 80 precision bombs, and your radar screen shows nothing. Clear sky, silence. And then the world explodes around you. That is the true weapon of the B-2. Not just the bombs, the helplessness it creates in the enemy before a single weapon is dropped. Afghanistan continued the pattern. B-2s flying from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Missions lasting over 40 hours. Striking Taliban positions with precision that ground commanders described as almost supernatural. Troops on the ground would call in coordinates. Hours later, with no visible aircraft, no audible engines, targets would simply cease to exist. American Special Forces reported that Taliban fighters, after experiencing repeated B-2 strikes they could neither predict nor defend against, began to believe they were being attacked by something that didn't follow normal rules of warfare. They weren't entirely wrong. The B-2 didn't just win battles. It rewrote the psychological contract of air warfare. The fundamental assumption that you can defend your airspace, that if you build radar systems and missile batteries and interceptor aircraft, you have a fighting chance against enemy bombers. The B-2 made that assumption obsolete, and every military on Earth that wasn't American took note. Why nobody can copy it, and what comes next. Every major military power on Earth has spent the last 3 decades trying to build their own B-2. China, Russia, every nation that watched Kosovo in 1999 with a mixture of awe and quiet terror. They all understood what the B-2 represented. Not just a powerful aircraft, but a fundamental shift in the balance of their power. A shift that left everyone who wasn't America in a deeply uncomfortable position. And here's what makes the B-2 truly extraordinary. Beyond its stealth, beyond its range, beyond its combat record, nobody has been able to copy it, not even close. And the reasons why reveal something remarkable about what America actually built in those secret facilities in the 1980s. The first wall, the tools that no longer exist. When people try to reverse engineer advanced military technology, they usually assume that if you have enough money, enough engineers, and enough time, you can figure it out. Study the design, understand the principles, rebuild it. But the B-2 broke that assumption in a way that is almost uniquely frustrating for rival nations. Because the manufacturing infrastructure that produced the B-2, the specialized jigs, the custom fabrication equipment, the unique assembly processes, was so extraordinarily specific to this one aircraft that when production ended, most of it was dismantled. You cannot copy what you cannot build, and you cannot build it without tools that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. China's aerospace engineers understand the B-2's general design principles. They've studied every publicly available photograph, every declassified document, every scrap of information they could obtain through both legitimate research and, according to multiple U.S. intelligence reports, extensive espionage. They know what the B-2 is supposed to look like from the outside, but knowing what something looks like and knowing how to build it are two completely different problems. And for the B-2, the gap between those two problems is measured in decades. The second wall, the software that took a generation to write. Remember what we established earlier. A flying wing is inherently unstable. Without continuous computerized correction, it falls out of the sky. The flight control software that keeps the B-2 airborne is not just code. It is the accumulated result of decades of research, testing, crashes, refinements, and engineering solutions to problems that only revealed themselves mid-flight. It represents thousands of engineer years of work that cannot be shortcut. China's H-20 stealth bomber program, their most serious attempt at a B-2 equivalent, has been in development for over a decade. And according to aviation analysts who track the program, one of the central reasons for its repeated delays is exactly this software problem. Writing stable flight control code for a flying wing configuration from scratch, without the institutional knowledge base that Northrop built over 40 years, is a generational engineering challenge. A flying wing without that software isn't a bomber. It's a very expensive crash waiting to happen. The third wall, the exhaust problem, nobody can solve. This is the detail that China's H-20 engineers reportedly lose sleep over. The B-2's engines are buried inside the wing. The exhaust is mixed with cool air through a sophisticated system that dramatically reduces the infrared signature of the aircraft. From below, from the angle that heat-seeking missiles approach, the B-2 is nearly thermally invisible. Solving this problem, what engineers call low observable exhaust mixing, requires solving a chain of interconnected thermal, aerodynamic, and materials engineering challenges simultaneously. The B-2 team cracked this in the 1980s through years of classified testing and iteration. China, despite enormous investment and genuine engineering talent, has not been able to replicate this solution. Their H-20 prototypes reportedly still produce infrared signatures detectable enough to compromise their low observable profile at combat altitudes. They can build a flying wing shape, they cannot make it thermally invisible the way the B-2 is. And without solving that problem, the H-20 isn't a B-2, it's a target. Russia's response and what it revealed. Russia looked at the B-2 problem differently. Rather than trying to copy stealth bomber technology, they invested heavily in what they called counter-stealth, radar systems specifically designed to detect low observable aircraft. The S-400 and S-500 missile systems, long-range detection networks using low-frequency radar. The strategic logic was straightforward. If you can't build what America has, you build something that defeats what America has. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Russia's own military analysts acknowledge privately. These counter-stealth systems work against older, less sophisticated stealth designs. Against the B-2's specific combination of shape, coding, thermal management, and electronic silence, their effectiveness drops dramatically. Russia didn't copy the B-2 because they couldn't, and their alternative strategy of countering it hasn't fully worked either. The B-2 beat them coming and going. What comes next? The B-21 Raider. In December 2022, Northrop Grumman unveiled the B-21 Raider, the aircraft designed to eventually replace the B-2 and carry American strategic air power through the middle of this century. And the B-21 is, in every meaningful way, a direct descendant of everything the B-2 proved possible. Same flying wing configuration, more advanced stealth coding built on 4 additional decades of material science. Software written from a position of institutional knowledge that no rival nation possesses. And critically, designed from the ground up to be manufactured and maintained at a fraction of the B-2's cost, addressing the one genuine weakness the original program had. The B-21 doesn't just continue the B-2's legacy, it compounds it. Because every year China and Russia have spent trying to crack the B-2 secrets, America has been using those same secrets as the foundation for something even further ahead. The technological gap that opened in the 1980s hasn't closed, it has widened. And that is perhaps the most stunning legacy of the B-2 spirit. It wasn't just a weapon system, it was a proof of concept that permanently separated American aerospace capability from everything else on Earth. It proved that stealth at scale was achievable. It proved that an invisible heavy bomber could survive, navigate, and devastate defended airspace without losing a single aircraft in combat. And it established a knowledge base, a manufacturing tradition, and an institutional understanding of stealth technology that rivals have spent 30 years and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to replicate. They haven't. They can't. And by the time they get close, the B-21 will have made the conversation irrelevant. All over again, the B-2 Spirit first flew in 1989. It is still, in 2024, the most capable stealth bomber on Earth. No other weapons program in history has maintained that kind of generational dominance for that long. $2 billion per aircraft, 35 years of unmatched superiority. In the brutal mathematics of military power, that might actually be a bargain.